Welcome to a quick discussion of the Klonoa Phantasy Reverie series. Released for the 25th anniversary of the original, this is a compilation of Klonoa Door to Phantomile and Klonoa 2 Lunatea's Veil. This was actually one of my most anticipated releases of the year, so I wanted to highlight both games in this collection, starting with Door to Phantomile. Of the two games in this collection, I'm much more familiar with Door to Phantomile, since I actually played the Wii version from 2008, even though I have never actually played all of the PS1 version from 1997. So, Klonoa is a 2.5D platformer that's divided into a bunch of different stages, so you basically have, several worlds divided into 2 stages each, so let's head into Vision 1-1. This version adds in some interesting changes to the cutscenes, actually. So you actually have the ability to speed up cutscenes by holding down R, or whatever the equivalent is on each console, but you can also skip cutscenes by holding down Start, or whatever the equivalent is. Another change from the Wii version is that version had a fictional language as an option similar to the PS1 version, but there was also an English dub. This release does not have the English dub, which frankly, if you ask most Klonoa fans, they will not be too bothered by that because the English dub was actually pretty unpopular. Alright, so Klonoa is a fairly straightforward platformer, but it actually is really impressive for the PS1 specifically. I've played a little bit of it, on PS3, where it is still available as a PS1 classic, by the way. And for the time, it's actually really incredible. The amount of dimension to it is really impressive. So Klonoa has a fairly limited moveset. You can use what's called a wind bullet from this ring he has to pick up enemies. You can actually throw enemies into the foreground or background as well, and you can also use the enemies to bounce off of them to gain extra height. You can also float in the air if you hold the jump button down, like so, but in general, that's basically all he has in terms of a moveset. In general, I actually feel like Klonoa is a really solid platformer, even though it's relatively simple. It has a lot of depth to it that is a little bit surprising given how straightforward it appears to be on the surface. And that goes for more than just the gameplay, but also the story and atmosphere. It is actually a really fascinating game, and I don't want to say too much because it is definitely a story that's worth experiencing. In general, another divisive aspect of the Wii version is the visual side of the presentation as well. The Wii version actually had a different character model for Klonoa, where he looked a little bit closer to his Klonoa 2 design, a little bit taller and a little bit older looking. Rather than the sort of shorter, cutesier look that he has in the PS1 version. This version introduces a new character model that's closer to the PS1 model. It still feels like it's mostly based on the Wii animations, so it does create some problems where he has that giant collar on, and his arms definitely clip through the collar a lot in cutscenes. Another change is the opening of the game, for example, is a pre-rendered cutscene, while it's actually in-engine for the Wii version and this version. And some actually prefer the pre-rendered scene for the PS1 version. So this game also tries to adapt the PS1 version in other ways as well, like lighting has actually been adjusted to be a little bit closer to the PS1 version. Looking at side-by-side comparisons, the Wii version looks actually kind of washed out by comparison to either this version or the original. So yeah, a lot of like background details have actually been color corrected to be a little bit more vibrant, like the PS1 version. But this does create some downsides. Some of the late game stages end up losing a lot of impact in both the Wii version and the Phantom Reverie or Phantasy Reverie version, because they're so vibrant to the point where they actually look too bright and happy for what is happening in the story at that time. So yeah, it's a very divisive remake, and this version trying to kind of fix some of the issues people had with the remake, it's commendable, but I almost feel like in a lot of cases, a full remake would have been a little bit more preferable, because then they could have actually gone through and actually remade everything to be closer, rather than trying to kind of retrofit the Wii version into what the PS1 version looked like. In general, I still really enjoyed playing this game, having only really delved into the Wii version. I actually like this a lot. There are a couple things I'm not the biggest fan of. The obvious one is this is the Switch version, which isn't the best optimized. From what I gather, this was remade in the Unity engine, and basically that leads to the Switch version having some issues that are not as prominent on the other consoles. Like, it just wasn't optimized for Switch specifically, because that would take a little bit more work that was not really put into this collection. There is a lot of work into this collection, but the Switch version in particular definitely has some rough spots. Alright, let's check out a little bit of 1-2. So yeah, the Switch version has frame rate issues at the moment. This is being played off the launch version of the game. Whether this is going to be patched, who knows. By the way, there is actually a demo available on all platforms as well. If you want to see if the performance is going to be a problem on Switch, you can always try that. I've actually tried the demo on Xbox, and it runs totally fine there. So if you have any of the other consoles and don't care about portability, I would actually recommend probably the other versions as well. It's also on Steam. This game has actually been somewhat under-advertised. Like, it just kind of sneaked up on everybody because Bandai Namco really hasn't done the best job of promoting it, while also saying that if the game sells well enough, they'll consider making more Klonoa games. So the Klonoa community has been very vocally promoting this game on their own, because Namco Bandai is not really promoting it themselves. I would obviously love to see more Klonoa games. This is actually one of my favorite games for the Wii. Yeah, at least probably my favorite third-party game at the very least. I just really enjoyed this game back in the day, and I still really like it a lot. Definitely expect a redo of my original Let's Play at some point, because I did really enjoy this collection. But yeah, there were definitely some things that I wish they had put a little bit more, or they had been able to put more time and effort into. But as is, it's still a pretty great way to experience this game in particular. I definitely think I prefer it over the Wii version on the whole, and I still, again, someday I would like to play the PS1 version just to see what it's like. Oh yeah, another change. There are actually difficulty options. So basically, normal is like the PS1 difficulty, to my understanding. The wind bullet distance is a little bit shorter, you have 3 hearts instead of 5, and you have finite lives. There's also an easy mode where you have 5 hearts, like in the Wii version, and the wind bullet also travels farther, which is great because the wind bullet's hitbox is a little bit spotty, so having a little bit more distance can actually be very nice. After finishing the game, there's also a no damage mode where if you get hit at all, you have to restart the stage. Yeah, you have 1 life and 1 heart. But with that being said, let's actually move over to Klonoa 2. While Klonoa 1 was a very nice game to revisit after several years of not having played it, I had actually never played Lunatea's Veil before this collection. Immediately, it's actually structured a little bit differently. Instead of like stages and like a world, you basically have this little interconnected world map connecting everything. We're actually going to jump into one of the stages that was actually in the demo as well. My impressions of Klonoa 2 were actually not as positive as I was hoping, and I think I know why. It's because Klonoa 2 was a game I actually wanted to play for a very, very long time after playing the original. But the original was a 2001 PS2 game that had never been re-released up until this point, and as a result, it was very, very rare and very, very expensive. So I never got a chance to actually play Klonoa 2. Also, it's actually a very difficult game to emulate, from what I gather, to the point where, to my understanding, even the PS3s that were back compatible had trouble running Klonoa 2 at full speed. So yeah, it's kind of a tricky game to get running in other ways, so having an actual official re-release is great after all these years. Compared to Klonoa 1, where they had kind of an intermediate step that they could draw from, Klonoa 2 was a 2001 game, and that's what they had to draw from, so this game actually had a lot more work put into remastering it. It's almost why I feel like Klonoa 1 had less changes from the Wii version, partly because it was more up-to-date to begin with, but also because more of the effort had to go into this game, and that's completely understandable, but in general, I actually have a couple of issues with it. Like, I wish I liked it a little bit more. One issue I have is, I don't know if it's just me, but the wind bullet doesn't feel as responsive in this game. Partly, the actual distance it travels feels very short for some reason, but also like the hitbox feels very spotty. But it's also because I feel like this game, Klonoa 1, as an example, is actually known for its difficulty spikes. Klonoa 2 also has some difficulty spikes, and there are definitely some sequences where the wind bullet doesn't feel responsive enough for what the game is asking of you. At least that's how I felt. I kind of wish I had played on the easier difficulty to have that extra distance on that move, to have made it a little bit easier. I think I would have actually enjoyed the game a lot more if I could actually, like, if I could have gone through some of the sections a little bit more easily and weren't like stuck at certain platforming moments just because I felt like the wind bullet was not responsive enough. You might notice that my life count in Klonoa 1 was like 50, and it was more like 5 in this game, and there's a reason for that, because this game is actually pretty tough. Again, I would actually almost recommend using the easy mode, because it would probably be a lot nicer with, yeah, the wind bullet being a little bit better, and also infinite lives. I almost feel like the health increase isn't the biggest deal. It's mostly the other two changes that I feel like would help a lot. Also, by the way, there are collectibles, but one really nice thing in Klonoa 1 and 2 is if you actually complete a stage, you don't have to collect everything over again. So basically, if you miss one thing, you only have to get that one thing. You don't have to get all, like, 6 collectibles in one playthrough. It was still kind of annoying in this game in particular because the stages are actually really long. So in one case, I had to play through the entire stage again to get one collectible, and it took, like, 10-20 minutes. The Klonoa 1 stages do ramp up in difficulty and overall stage length, but in general, Klonoa 2 feels a lot longer. It lists clear times on the file select screen. I feel like this game took longer than 3 hours. I don't know if it's only counting stages or something like that, but it definitely felt like at least twice as long as the first game. Also, I do prefer Klonoa 1's story to 2's story. 2's story is still pretty good, but in general, I didn't feel like it has much punch as the first game's story, which is notoriously like a very impactful storyline. 2 was still good, but I don't know, it didn't feel as like novel, I guess. But again, both games are still pretty solid. I still just prefer 1 a little bit more. One game I actually thought of when playing this was Gravity Rush, where I kind of felt the same way, where like Klonoa 1 is a very well-rounded, like short experience, while Klonoa 2 is a little bit longer, but almost to a fault at times, where it doesn't quite capitalize. It doesn't have enough new mechanics or like interesting level design to warrant how much longer it is. Specifically, a problem I have is, you might have noticed on the level select, I actually had a choice between 2 different levels on the same tile, and that's because a lot of stages in Klonoa 2 have revisits with different gimmicks, basically. And that's still cool, but it does mean that you're basically playing through a lot of the game twice, just with slight variations. And again, they do mix it up quite a bit in the revisits, and that is a good thing, but I do feel like the game almost stretches itself too thin by having like level revisits to the extent it does. So it's like a longer but less like well-rounded, less like concise experience. So I felt it kind of wore out its welcome a little bit by the end, but I still enjoyed it overall. This collection currently is $40 US. There's also a digital deluxe edition that has extra costumes, like basically swapping costumes between the 2 games. So like a Klonoa 1 costume for Lunatea's Veil, and a Klonoa 2 costume for Dora the Phantom Isle. There are also crossover costumes like a Pac-Man hat, not that he already has Pac-Man on his hat, but like a full like Pac-Man hat, along with like a Katamari hat and so on. And there's also like a digital art book and soundtrack as well. I didn't actually get the deluxe edition because I didn't feel like it was entirely worth it. I almost feel... Also, there's no physical edition for this game, as a heads up, which was very disappointing when that was announced, considering the rest of the world actually got a physical release. But in general, I do still think this is a great collection. By the way, one cool addition in Klonoa 1 is you can do little like twirls if you press the RL. You can also do little poses with these as well. So yeah, these are very charming, well-rounded games. I definitely hope the series can continue. I hope this collection sells well enough to warrant at least a collection of the other spin-offs. Like, I already did a full Let's Play of Klonoa Beach Volleyball, but there's also multiple puzzle platformers for Game Boy and the Wonder Swan. Now, there's a trilogy there. There's also a JRPG. The Wonder Swan game and the JRPG actually just recently got fan translations, so at least there's a way to play them in that form. But I would like to see, at the very least, another collection to have all of the handheld Klonoa games on current gen. So yeah, I hope this game does well. But with that being said, thank you for watching, and I hope you'll join me next time for another discussion.